Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. So today we're going to be doing a review of Sex Education Season 2. Yeah, we're finally here. It dropped on Netflix, I believe, 2 days ago, and I binge watched the entire thing yesterday. Fantastic season, another fantastic season. One of the reasons I am so happy that Netflix decided to renew this for a second season, because there doesn't appear to be, I don't know, we call it a safe space or just a place, a forum, whatever, for this subject matter, as well as things like even 13 Reasons Why. Both 13 Reasons Why and Sex Education kind of deals with topics that people consider to be somewhat taboo, but it's best to have the discussion sooner rather than later. Later often is the worst case scenario, right? But there's always some bit of controversy surrounding this subject matter, right? 13 Reasons Why came under pressure because people felt as though it romanticized suicide, which it did not, in my opinion. I didn't think it warranted a second season, to be honest, but I did love the first season and what it was trying to achieve. Right, and sex education is no different. A lot of persons feel as though this subject should not be, it shouldn't be something that's available for teenagers to watch. And it's one of the topics that I even touch on in this series. And I don't know if the showrunners or the writers took that in mind in doing season 2, but if they did, kudos to them. They did a fantastic job with it. But yeah, you wouldn't find something like this on network television, and certainly not on something like Disney Plus. But there's a time and there is a place for everything, and there definitely needs to be a place for these discussions, right? So season 2, a lot happened. I enjoyed the season thoroughly. There was a lot I loved. There are some things that I was a bit disappointed with. I didn't hate or dislike it, but just disappointed with the direction in which they chose to actually take. But there's so much. I've just kind of uh, picked out a select few areas and characters that I want to talk about, and I can catapult off of that to discuss other key points throughout the season overall. All right. Now the first off is of course Otis, and a bit soon to talk about Otis, and I'll probably reference him somewhere in between different characters and so on, because he's integral to every to the series as a whole and the different characters. He's the one that binds them all together to some extent, right? But the very first episode very intrigued me a whole lot because it actually touched on something, masturbation, which isn't something that we talk about a whole lot, especially as men, and I mean. For some it's viewed as something embarrassing, so you definitely don't talk about it with your mates, and you certainly do not talk about it with your parents. So it's just good to see them actually portray that, his discomfort when his mom asked about it, his pleasure when he found out that this is something I can do, but at the same time, yeah, it's not something you should get addicted to, right? And I just thought they did it. They found a clever way to actually portray that. It was still funny. It was still comedic. They still managed to maintain that sense of humor, that brand of humor that we came to expect from season 1. And I just loved how they did that in this first episode. And Otis himself. One of my favorite things this season was definitely Drunk Otis, because I'm first and foremost, I'm a very blunt person, and often enough that does get me in trouble. But you get to the truth a lot faster than you do if you took an alternative route, right? And I felt as though that's what Oates has been doing all this time. He's been trying to find different ways to accomplish things without hurting everyone. And if you do that, you will eventually get there. But you want to take that route, right? And you've seen what happens when he does go that route to try to please every single person, and it just doesn't work out for him. So, Drunk Otis was a highlight of this season. He came in swinging, and he was right. And it's one of the things I'm glad. I'm both happy that they had Drunk Otis do it, but I felt as though they backtracked, on some of the points that he made throughout the remainder of the season. Which is why the majority of those moments where I was a bit disappointed came much later, in like the third to second to last episode. And that's in his relationships with Maeve and Otis, right? And Maeve and Ola. So with Maeve, Drunk Otis, again on point. He pointed out that okay, Maeve has been selfish, and she has, and I think a lot of us has have been in those situations before where you pour your heart out to someone and they don't reciprocate, right? But then they see you with someone else and they see you happy and at that moment they realize, oh hey, maybe I messed up, but is that a valid enough reason to disrupt that person's newfound happiness, right? Because you didn't see something, you missed something the first time around, and I think that was the back and forth that we were seeing in season two, right? And I was completely on board with Drunk Otis on that one. I think Maeve was in fact a bit selfish in her initial decision. And I'm not saying that she didn't have reason, right? And we've seen that throughout the majority of season one, where she tries not to make bad decisions, but the alternative is ends up being so much worse, right? So even within Otis, she was hesitant with him because of what had happened prior to that, with other guys that she was involved with. But I mean, comparing Otis and Jackson, I mean they're they're very different characters, right? And there's of course this stigma, where women always go for the bad boys and stuff like that. And I mean, let's be honest, there is some truth to that, but it's so much more gray than just black. It's not black and white, right? So it's more complex. The truth is always more complex than that, right? But she did choose at the end of season one. She was too late. She ended up with Ola, who, as if you've seen my reaction to even the last trailer, as I've pointed out, I am on Team Ola, or at least I was, right? And that's one of the things that I'll touch on later on as well in terms of some of my disappointments this season. But where we left off last season, Ola did what me did not, right? And she was direct about what she wanted. She was decisive, right? She approached Otis and told him, "Okay, is this what you want?" And I would really, Ola is in my mind, or that Ola, where I think you know most people should go. I mean, you should go in knowing what exactly you want. You shouldn't come in trying to figure it out. But again, in this context, they are teenagers, so hey, things are going to change. Who's to say these persons are going to be who they spend the rest of their lives with? In some instances, it works out that way. Others, not so much. But yeah, and I mean, what he did say with Ola as well, because she made a request of him to stop talking to his friend, which is not something that I would ever recommend. To drop a mate or a friend, because and again, it's always complicated, because if it makes your partner uncomfortable, if it's a case where there are intimate feelings involved, then that I can understand. But ordinarily, I don't think it's necessary. It's a bit extreme, right? But I did understand from Ola's perspective, because he did have feelings for me. So he tried to do the right thing, stop talking to her, and then she decided, hey, I realized I do not care as much about you as I thought I did initially, and so he was just being tossed from one end to the other, and I just love that Drunk Otis called them out on that, and I was disappointed when he kind of retracted that, later on, by apologizing to them. Should have apologized because he chose the wrong form in which to express that. Yes, but what he did say was not wrong. It was very accurate. It was on point, right? And one of my issues with this season overall is that it felt as though they painted Ola as an unlikable character this season for the sole purpose of actually making Maeve seem more appealing. Not that she wasn't appealing already, but um, I don't know. It felt as though Ola moved from this decisive person in season one, where she knew what she wanted, to this indecisive person in season two, where she was conflicted about whether she was straight or bisexual. And it just felt like it came out of nowhere for me, right? But the argument can be made that we didn't know her that well in season one. She was introduced, I believe, somewhere halfway through the season. So it could be that these feelings have been there all along, but we've just not taken notice of them because we didn't know the character that well. Um, So there's definitely a lot of conflict there, and plenty of blame to go around for different characters. Now, speaking of, I mean, Ola and Otis and even Maeve, the humor is one of again, always as always, the biggest highlights of the series entirely. I sat down binge watching this, and I made a mistake of you know, having a snack and eating while doing it, and half the time I ended up just spitting that stuff out because it's like I just couldn't contain my laughter. There's this one character in it. I can't recall her name, and I made some notes, but I didn't make a note of her name there. It's a redhead character that Otis helped back in season one with her partner. I believe she was gay. And she just has this very straight face, and she never smiles. And he goes to her in this season to learn how to actually finger a girl or something like that. And she was showing him, and every moment she's on the screen, she cracks me the hell up. And the banter between her and the girl whose orange she just took and gave to him to demonstrate on. It was just hilarious. There were just moments throughout the season that just had me on the floor just laughing, and I haven't had a good laugh like this probably since the last season. There aren't a lot of comedy elements in other shows that kind of bring it as well as this series has done so far. So it's a very well written series, very funny, very funny. I gotta say. And it's important, the reason for the comedy, right? I don't know if that's what was intended by the writer or the showrunner, but it kind of normalizes the subject matter, and I think that's important. As I mentioned earlier, it's the discussion about surrounding sex is always seen as something that shouldn't be talked about, and the humor helps to kind of enlighten the topic, right? And it kind of normalizes it because it should be normal. Sex is a normal part of your life from beginning to end. It always will be. Whatever your orientation might be, it will play an important part of your life, and it shouldn't be something that we feel embarrassed to actually talk about or flustered every time we see it somewhere. It should not be. Right, so the humor definitely plays a role here in ensuring that it keeps things light enough where you don't feel as though it's been thrown in your face, or it doesn't feel vulgar, and um, it's just so well done. The writing is so refined that you can't help but appreciate it. And oftentimes, it's not, whenever you see these acts taking place, it doesn't romanticize it. So even while watching the series and you see these, you see the kids, you see something happening here and there, and the kids doing something that they should not be doing, or you know even the adults, which I'll get back to actually, because that was one of my favorite moments this episode as well, with Miss Sands. But whenever you do see some sexual acts throughout the season, it's not something that you're thinking like, oh yeah, I want to do that. No, it's raw, but at the same time, it's raw and unfiltered, but at the same time, it just looks uncomfortable, and it's something hilarious, and you just want to laugh. It's not something that you're thinking, okay, it's sexual, and the writer did a good job with that. So you focus more on the takeaways from from the whatever context you find yourself in that moment. So you focus on the message and not so much the act itself that is actually taking place, and it was just fantastically done. No, speaking of characters, two of my favorite characters this season, definitely are going to be Lily and Ames. Right now, Lily was one of my favorite characters from even back in season one, because she's just that one character that has remained unchanged from the very beginning to the end of season two. She's the same character. Very quirky, unusual. She's weird, and that play that they put on at the very end of season two there with Jackson, that had her name written all over it. I didn't even realize that it was hers at the end until I may have missed it until I think the chairman, right, that was visiting the school, and she was looking at the poster and she's like, "What does this look like? They're in a forest full of dicks." And I'm like, "Wait a minute, Lily." And because I recalled her drawings and stuff from in season one where she was showing, there was this one scene where every not just a single scene, every single time that she's on screen, that's Lily, right? But she's just been this character that has remained consistent throughout. She knows what she's about and she knows what she wants, and I just found the character very likable. Ames as well, who Amy came off as a very ditzy character in season one. Still very much, a kind-hearted young lady, but very ditzy and clumsy, and not very sure about what she actually wants. But this season, she definitely stepped up in addressing some of the more serious issues in terms of sexual harassment and so on. And her character does kind of evolve, but not so much changing at her core who she is, right? At the very end, she's still very much one of the more consistent characters throughout as well. So for that reason, these two kind of found a place in my heart because they've not they haven't been flip flopping. They've remained the same throughout, and it's not to say they haven't grown, but their personality remains in intact, right? Yeah, definitely Lily and Ames. One of my two of my favorite characters this season overall, and they were definitely a highlight of the series. Now, the one of the other things as well, the parents and teachers being an addition to this season. Now, last season, while we had some adults in the room, right? Otis and Ola's parents, were for the most part what our focus was on. In addition to, we got some glimpse of the principal, Mr. Groff's home and what his lifestyle was like. But for the most part, the focus was on the kids. This season, however, they've introduced more adults. The kind of it makes things a bit more interesting, right? And one of the things that it has revealed in this season, for those who don't know, is that even as adults, we don't have everything figured out. We're no different. No, we are a collective, of our experiences, but at the same time, you never not you never stop learning and experiencing and growing. So even as adults, and I'm glad that they put that in there. So introducing Miss Sands and her relationship with the music teacher, or is it well, he's the music and science teacher. He seems to be the only teacher in the school. Now that I think about it, why is he doing everything? But and of course, definitely surprised Miss Sands. Coming from season one, she was just this nerdy literature teacher, and then you're like, oh wait, Miss Sands is into some kink and stuff. But kudos to her. I mean, they got more of her this season, and she definitely shown in the roles that she was actually given, and to kind of demonstrate that, okay, as adults, even though we need to provide some guidance to students, and we have to be the adults in the room, we do have a life outside of that. Even teachers, it's not just, and it occurs to me now, because we of course have to hold certain persons in different positions to a higher standard, um, while acknowledging that these persons are only human at the end of the day, right? So it was good to have them introduce Mrs. Sands, her relationship with the music teacher and the challenges that they were having. There's also Mr. Gruff and Mrs. Gruff, who had a falling out, which I think many of us saw coming. I mean, they were never really happy, so to speak. But at the same time, Mr. Gruff, who he was he wasn't my favorite character in season one, but I liked his character. He was very rigid, in a way that a principal, to some extent, needs to be, right? We are still dealing with high school kids, and they do need a firm hand, like, to guide them in a certain direction. And I felt as though he played that role well, despite his flaws at home. He played that role well at school, and I thought the students respected him for it, right? And with that, in season one, you never really had a bad guy to root against, right? It was more the situations that our characters found themselves in and how they had to resolve it. But in season two, it felt as though he became that villain that you needed to root against. I didn't love it, but I understood why they felt they needed to do it, and I do feel that there will be some resolution and some redemption for his character. But I mean, as a principal, releasing the journal, releasing Otis's mom's journal to the rest of the school, it was not my favorite moment of his. it wasn't my favorite moment of his, and I don't know. As I said before, I didn't hate him last season. I thought he was a well written character, and it kind of kind of sucked that they kind of made him the villain of the season. But I'm hopeful that there will be some redemption for him in the season to come. Um, Assuming his wife understood his anger towards Jean for actually what he feels, because again she didn't encourage his wife to leave him or anything like that, but he has a lot more learning to do. I mean, even as an adult, as I mentioned before, he has a lot more growing to do, a lot more learning to do. He, like his son, pretty much just, as Jean pointed out, close themselves off to any and everyone because they're afraid to go all in and being hurt. But at the same time, he's been with his wife for several years, so at a certain point, when do you not worry, that something is going to happen and you guys will be separated? And that's a real question for everyone to think about. But at the same time, there's you can be married for 30 years and then in the blink of an eye something changes and you find yourself separated. So there are no guarantees, and when it comes to something like love, and I think that again another message from this season, there really is none, right? You just have to kind of throw caution to the wind to some extent. Um, I'm not necessarily a throw caution to the wind guy. I like to think things through, but at the same time, you kind of have to ensure that you're all in. You can't go in, you can't be half-assed with it and think that, okay, this might not work out, so let me not give it my all, right? If you're not willing to give it your all, then don't go in. So I mean that was one of the strong messages, and it definitely played out to the full extent of it. Oh, teachers, the adults aside, the relationship between Bev and Jackson this season, um, is what I hope for. I've said it before that I was initially Team Ola, um, not the new Ola, because I feel as though she has changed somewhat throughout between season 1 and season 2. Not so much the likable character that I kind of loved back in season 1 when she first came in. But the relationship between Bev and Jackson is what I had hoped for Otis and Maeve. Yes, I know it's not a popular opinion, but I do feel as though who was it that said it? Raheem, right? He said something at the end that I feel summarizes my thoughts on this entire season completely. I think I made a note of it here somewhere. Yes, it was after um, Adam made his announcement that they interrupted the play to make this gesture to Eric, and he said, when Eric went outside to apologize to him, and he said, "Don't apologize; it would only make it worse." But he said he's happy for him, but he knows Adam will hold his hand, but he doesn't believe that he'll catch him. And that kind of summarizes everything for me for this season in terms of the direction that I feel the writers are going with the characters, and Otis and May's relationship as well. I feel as though she's that girl that will can hold his hand, but I don't believe she can catch him in Raheem's words. Um, so it's the character that we expect him to actually end up with. It would be Maeve, and that's why everyone's rooting for him to be with Maeve. But it's not. Oftentimes, it's not the characters that you expect that you. It's not the people that you expect that you end up falling in love with. It's usually the most unexpected ones, and I felt as though that applies to Otis and Maeve as well. I think they're great friends. I think they understand each other, but that doesn't necessarily translate to a romantic relationship, right? Which is one of the reasons why I appreciate this platonic relationship between Jackson and Bev, or is it Viv? I forget. That guy kept mixing her name up. That I've confused them myself. I think it's Viv. Um, but there, and I hope that in the next season they don't the writers don't make their relationship romantic, right? I think it's important to, along with all the messages that this season and this series overall, along with all the messages that that it has done so well. I think one of them that needs to be included should be that you can be the best of friends with someone of the opposite sex without it becoming something romantic. Oftentimes that's unrealistic, I know, or it's very difficult, but it does happen. Some of my best friends are actually females, and there's no romantic involvement, right? So Bevan, damn it, Viv and Jackson's relationship, I absolutely loved it. And I mean, even though they were trying to hurt each other at some point in terms of throwing insults and stuff, and he was calling her robotic. She was robotic, but in a good, in a good way. She's very frank and matter of fact, and um, the complete opposite of what he's been doing for the entirety of season one. He's just been lying and deceiving and crushing his own hands so he wouldn't have to tell his parents the truth. He needed a friend like that to kind of balance him because the people on his swimming team they were his buds, but they weren't his real friends. Otherwise, they didn't see him. They didn't see the real him. They didn't see how much he was hurting. They didn't see any of that. And as much as he thought that he liked Maeve, and again to my point, as much as he thought he liked Maeve, he really didn't like her or love her. Um, she just understood him, and he could just say to her what he couldn't say to anyone else. And you can have a friend that you can confide and do all those things in with without it becoming something more. So absolutely love Bev this season. She probably should have been in my list of favorite characters up there with Lily and Ames, but she's a new character, but she's definitely, in terms of a new character being added, she's definitely one of my favorites. Right up there with Raheem, weirdly enough. But I mean, on from that, Adam and Eric, which I touched on earlier with Raheem's last words, right? Right about around when I was making these notes around past the half season mark, I think I just jot down Adam, just like that, because at that point Adam was he was the character that I was gonna make a note of that. I don't see why is he here. What is the point of Adam being here? Because for the first half of the season, he didn't do much except kind of dismantle the relationship that Eric had with Raheem. And again, coming back to what I kind of a similarity between what happened with Maeve, right? Where he only approached Eric, even though he did kiss Eric, and I think they made out or something at the end of last season. But he didn't. He wasn't very forthcoming with his feelings about Eric initially. So it felt as though he was doing the very same thing that Maeve did, which was, okay, I see you now with someone and you're happy, and now's the time I'm going to jump in and tell you how I feel. And I think that's a very selfish thing to do, and he did the very same thing with Eric. Because he saw him with Raheem, went to his window and decided, okay, now is the time I want to spend some time with you. And so it's very reminiscent of what happened with Maeve and Otis as well. And it at the time I just hated Adam. At that moment in time, I was like, don't do this, right? Not now. You bullied this guy for years, not now. And Otis said the same thing to Eric as well. This guy's been bullying you for years, and you're suddenly to believe now that he has changed. And exactly, right? So for most of the season, I just had Adam's name there, and I'm like, Adam needs to go. But at the very last few episodes now, when we saw some inflection by Adam, some attempt to kind of right the wrongs that he has actually done. We got a glimpse of him in the military, and seeing that, for a large part of it, he's his father's son, right? He feels as though he can do everything on his own, even to the point of learning how to actually do the drills that he was required to do in military school. And then he went and he slowly began to, I wouldn't say necessarily warm my heart. So he's not necessarily one of my favorite characters or anything, but we saw some growth in his character, right? He's slowly opening up to different persons. Ola showed him some kindness, and he's like, why would you do that? Because he can't fathom someone actually doing an act of kindness, because he himself has never done it, and maybe because he's never learned it at home, because his dad is just a drill sergeant, right? So I'm slowly seeing some change in his character. I do worry for Eric, similar as Raheem said, right? In that Adam is still very much confused. He's still very much finding himself. He's still very much figuring things out, and that doesn't always make for the best if you're looking for someone to have a long lasting relationship with. But again, and one of the things I have to keep reminding myself of is that they're still in high school, and they're still figuring themselves out. Everyone is. So in addition to Adam confused, he's more confused than everyone else, but everyone has some room to actually grow, and this could actually work to their benefit. So for Eric's sake, I do hope things work out, because this was very much Eric's uplifting season, right? Season one was him being beaten down and being literally beaten up on his way home from this pride parade or something like that. I don't remember if he was, or he was going to see something with Otis, and on his way back he was assaulted. So this was Eric's season to shine, to get the things that he wanted. The popular guy, the first guy, the new student at school that everyone wanted to be with him, and then Adam came on and also wanted to be with him. So this was Eric's season to have fun, have uplifting moments, to fall in love, to fall out of love. This was all Eric's season, right? I felt Otis had much more of a complicated um, um, season in terms of figuring things out, and who he should. It was just not a great season for Otis, right? The Raheem himself, who, as I've said before, definitely not necessarily a favorite character, but I like the dynamic that he introduced to this season, where in terms of opposites attracting to some extent, right? Um, one of the things that interested me the most was when he actually went to church with Eric, and at that moment I thought that, okay, he perhaps, just perhaps, this is it, right? Because you'll find this one person who understands you to such a perfect extent. They're not perfect, and you don't have absolutely everything in common, but the name of the game is compromise, and for any relationship to actually thrive and succeed, you do have to do some amount of compromising. And Raheem being an atheist, and yes, surprisingly, Eric's mom was actually quite fine with it, but his dad was missing for the duration of this season, though, which I was actually looking to see his dad and what his response was, since he played such a huge role in Eric's coming out in season one. So I was a bit disappointed that his dad wasn't anywhere. He was nowhere to be seen in season two. But it highlighted his mom, and she was okay with it. But I thought in season one his mom didn't know that he was gay. Um, so, and that's what I thought in season one. I thought his dad knew about it, but he was trying to hide it from Eric's mom. But in this season, it seemed as though she's very much aware of it, clearly. But anyhow, when they went to the church, and he said he's an atheist, and it also raises an interesting dynamic with couples who have different religious beliefs, and how that impacts the relationship itself. And I mean, here with Eric and Raheem, they understood it, right? That okay, irrespective of whatever God you worship or you do not worship any at all, um, as long as you have those core values, it really doesn't matter as much, right? So and with that, I thought that cemented it, and that Eric would be happy here. And I think, I don't know, he doesn't know anything about Adam, and what are Adam's beliefs, what does Adam like, and I worry for him going into the new season, but I do hope he ends up being happy. Circling back a bit to the adults, to Jean and Jakob, right? I didn't make a note of it, but as I was discussing other things, I realized I wanted to touch on it a bit. For and at the end of the season, of course, she's now pregnant, which I'm assuming is with Jakob's child. Um, One of the things that I appreciate about Jakob, we didn't get a whole lot of him this season because we had so much of him last season. But when her ex-husband showed up, he, the first thing he did was he was like, "Do you want to stay over for dinner?" Um, just how he handled the entire situation was just something I was like, yeah, that's how it should be, right? Jean herself is obviously a very flawed character, and as Jacob pointed out, he said, I don't think you're ready for the kind of relationship that I'm ready for. And it speaks a lot to relationships that are asymmetrical, right? And where one person is more affectionate than the other. Now, as to whether or not those relationships can work out, I don't know. I don't think it's healthy. I don't think it's a healthy thing to do. Um, I think both persons need to be on the same wavelength in terms of what their expectations are. And yeah, I don't know. I think Jean perhaps she's actually learning. As I said before, even as adults, we're still learning, we're still experiencing, we're still growing. Or she's disconnected herself for so long from having romantic relationships that she's forgotten how to have one. Um, and I assume, I mean, at the end there, she said she misses him, and he's nothing like her. As he said, he's not as intellectual as her husband, but intellect isn't always the end all be all, right? Her husband is still very much a jerk. You can be smart and still be a jerk. You can be rich and still be a jerk. As a matter of fact, this kind of ties into something else that I wanted to talk about. You can be disabled and still be a jerk. This comment, of course, being forwarded at the Maeve's neighbor. I don't recall his name, but the disabled guy that has now moved in, who's an he's an arsehole, all right. Um, I understand him liking Maeve, but to kind of sabotage her relationship with Otis, as much as I'm not for the relationship, I think they need to figure it out themselves. That okay, maybe we're not the best for each other, and we're just good as friends. I'm sorry, and I know it's not what everyone wants, but I don't think they're great as a couple. But yeah, what he made a dick move there, telling Otis that she wasn't there and deleting the voice message. So we'll see how things work out. Whether she'll have a relationship with him. I don't think she should because um I, I guess maybe perhaps this is something that they were hinting at, or it was just so subtle that it wouldn't necessarily be apparent. But the issue of toxic relationships and people who and don't get me wrong. So I preface this by first saying that oftentimes, our struggles are what brings us together. Whether it be friends or persons you're intimately involved with. Oftentimes, struggles and our experiences and similar issues that we've had oftentimes bring us together. Tragedies often bring a lot of people closer together. But at the same time, toxic relationships are not something anyone should aim for. And I feel as though um, Maeve, were she to get involved with him, that's exactly what that would be. And he put it differently in that he said that no one else would understand because no one else knows what it's like to be abandoned and stuff like that. And he has a point, but that shouldn't be that shouldn't be the main driver that brings you together. It should help to cement a relationship that already exists there, but it shouldn't be the factor, right? um because immediately, while wasn't uh, her mother was no saint, I still felt as though there was some redemption there. She said she slipped once, but I think it would have been better for her to call her mother on it and in private alone, and make a decision there. But instead, she allowed his perceptions of an addict is always an addict, and she allowed that to cloud her judgment, and then now her mom is gone. So, and that happens a lot in toxic relationships. It's hard for you to move on from something when you're constantly being reminded of it, and it's not good for either party. So it's not so much that he's not good for me if she's not good for him either. right? It's all, the important thing is really balance, and as I said, you need to find someone that balances you out, and it's oftentimes it's because it's the opposites that do that, right? So even for her, in her situation, he's definitely not the best person to do that, because because they're so relatable in terms of, their past and their struggles that they've experienced. It's going to be hard for them to move on from that point, because their expectations are going to be the same for every single person that enters their life. So it's not a good relationship to have, and I hope she realizes that soon. So yeah, that's it for me. For season two, I think I talked up a storm. And before I forget, I mean, the last thing, the music. All right, almost forgot. So it's something I made a note that I need to absolutely say kudos to the team for the soundtrack, and throughout the uh just throughout season one, season two, the music has just been absolutely fantastic, and it, in part due to this series, it has actually introduced me to Ezra Furman, who I don't think I listened to before. I listened to a lot of contemporary and alternative and rock music, but I'm not sure what category it falls in. But I never heard Ezra Furman before until the season one. But I mean, the song came back. Yeah, it's kind of become the theme song for me for this season. I think it's from the album Transangelic Exodus, right? So definitely happy that they've managed, that they actually kept that. Love You So Bad soundtrack for this series. I think that should be they should use that track for this season, next season, all the seasons to come. It's a fantastic song. If you haven't checked out the album Angelic Exodus, be sure to check it out. It's fantastic. Anyway, that's enough ranting, guys. Be sure to post down below. Let me know what your thoughts are on this season, and what your expectations are, what you're looking forward to for the next season as well. Be sure to hit like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys